since we saw the preview gameplay footage about the new weapons, I immediately got enamored. I immediately knew that Milady was going to be one of my favorites. And I actually did use it quite extensively all throughout the DLC rendition. Today I want to show you what is it that I did with my Milady, and oh boy is it so powerful, and there's some little things around here and that we're going to tweak for this weapon to be that much more better. So the strengths and weaknesses of the Milady, well, the strengths being that it's very fast attacking. The attacks in a fast succession make this weapon ideal for it to be a weapon that would be proccing status ailments. That being said, the best possible scaling that you can have with this weapon is going to be in Dexterity. It already has a base Dexterity scaling, so this weapon gets the most out of it from a keen kind of affinity. That being said, it gets the most out of a Dexterity build. It's ideal for status build-up, so making it a bleed weapon, it's actually kind of nice. The thing is that in returns of damage, it doesn't have that much damage. And I'd say that's a little in-between balance, because it has higher damage than a regular one-handed sword, one-handed straight sword, but it's even faster. So I'd say that this is a little bit more powerful than a regular straight sword, and like I said, it's going to attack in a very fast succession of attacks, so it does have a little bit more damage, and while having a little bit more damage, it also has a little bit more speed, so that translates into a little bit more DPS than your regular weapons. One amazing thing about that as well is that we can use any type of coats or armament coats, oils, or anything that you would want to add to your weapon, so you can take advantage, most certainly, of the weaknesses of the enemy that you're fighting specifically. So for example, you're fighting dragons, then you would use dragon wound greases. You're fighting something that would be not resistant to magic or that is weak to magic, you would be using a magic kind of grease. And you're always going to take a little bit more advantage from that. The one thing that I do like to use as a base when I'm not entirely sure about the weaknesses of the enemy, it's fire, just purely because of the spell and the extra damage that we're going to get from that extra spell. The damage is arguably the one of the best damage types in the game, so if you're not entirely sure what kind of weakness does the enemy in front of you has, then you might as well just be using fire greases. The stats for a character are pretty straightforward. This is a Dexterity build, meaning that we have a maxed out Dexterity hard cap. At maxed out Dexterity hard cap, our weapon AR is going to be like 580, which is not that bad, considering that usually the straight swords are around 500, as well as with the katanas. Then again, this attacks faster, so that's actually kind of nice. And then remember that you can also coat your armament with some kind of grease to increase the damage, and the rest of it, everything is just pretty straightforward. We'd have, as a matter of fact, you know what, actually no, we don't have that 80 Dexterity, we have 75 Dexterity. We're pairing this thing up with a talisman that it's very beneficial for us for this type of weapon, but ultimately we are going to reach the maximum hard cap right there. Strength, the weapon requirement for the weapon is just 12, so I have 14 as a byproduct of my starting class, and there is 30, so that you can use a little bit heavier armor, be able to bypass that 51 armor threshold, that poise threshold. And then the mind, it doesn't consume that much mind, so you don't need that much, so feel free to change some of those points into endurance as well. And then with vigor, we have the hard cap at 60 right there. So for the equipment, like we mentioned, we are using the Keen Milady. The Keen Milady is going to have a total of 580 AR once you reach the maximum AR and you're using all of your buffs and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's just the Keen Milady. I'm using the Mesma Soldier Shield purely because it's a shield that has a nice guard boost. It has 66 once you get it to level 24, but it doesn't require that much strength, so you don't have to be investing in any type of strength to get a good shield that is going to have 100 physical resistance. The finger seal doesn't necessarily have to be the one that I'm using right here. It can be just any finger seal. We're not going to be using offensive spells. This is just for us to use that one spell that we're going to use to get a little bit more physical damage for a character, and since that is percentage based, it doesn't have necessarily be to be upgraded. As for the armor, anything really that you want to be using, just make sure that you are bypassing that 51 poise threshold. I'm using the Drake Knight armor right here because I think that the mail armor that it has, it looks nimble enough for it to suit the playstyle of the weapon, that finesse that the character has with each swing, with each slash of the weapon. I think that it correlates quite decently. However, we actually do need to have a little bit more of poise, so I'm using the Gauntlets of Solitude, and in this case scenario I wanted for some kind of plated armor that wouldn't make my character look that bulky, that would still make it look like a knight, but it more like a dexterous knight, more like a nimble knight, such as this one that we have right here. At the end of the day, this is up to your personal preference. This is of no consequence. I just want for you to be aware that you need to be bypassing that 51 threshold poise, so that you can be bypassing some of those attacks from the enemies. As for the talismans, I have 3 right here that should be a must. Shout of Alexander, for us to get a little 15% more damage with our Ashes of War. Relentless Cameo. This increases your damage by 20% every time that you enter into a stance mode for 1 second. With the Ash of War that we are going to be using right here, we actually do have stance mode, and it's a very, very safe stance mode that we can take advantage of this right here. I'll show you why in a little while, but more often than not, this is going to correlate into 20% more extra damage. Then Millicent Prosthesis, like I said, this is a very fast attacking weapon, especially with the Ash of War that we're using, that can deal like several slashes in just a matter of seconds. So this is always going to be extra little damage right there. And then finally, we have an extra slot for the talisman that you can use up to your personal preference. You can have utility, you can have defense, you can have stamina, you can have anything really that you would want to use in there. I have some recommendations in here, but they don't necessarily have to be those talismans that you should be using. You can by all means use any talisman that you want to use, that you feel that it fits your playstyle. The Ash of War, we're using the wing stance, and I actually want to tell you something about this because you, more often than not, we are going to get that extra little that you see right there. I activated my extra 20% more damage, and you might say, well, yeah, that is not that amazing because sometimes I don't have the time to do so, or sometimes it's just for one single proc of the Ash of War, and to some extent, yes, like for example, you could prepare this thing and then use the heavy portion of the Ash of War, which is that one that leaps into the enemy, and then you have to prepare it again. But the thing is that this could also be it could be combo, like you can do this thing and then you have to prepare it again for you to do it again, and then for you to use the light one, so you do have to prepare it again. But this Ash of War could also be turned into a combo. It has amazing posture damage and stagger damage, which means that you're going to be staggering people quite a lot. But it has 2 different type of combos that are always going to retain the Relentless Cameo, meaning that you're always going to get that extra 20% on your follow-up attack combos. So if you continue doing for example, the light attack, you will see that I haven't lost my buff right there, and I continue to do the light attack, so that is a combo that you could retain and still maintain the buff of the weapon Ash of War without losing it. As soon as I stop, I'm going to lose my buff. That is not the only one that you can be using. Like for example, you can be using a light Ash of War followed by a light Ash of War, and then followed by a heavy Ash of War. And the heavy Ash of War, as you can see right here, it comes out very fast and it's still going to retain the buff. And that could also be combo however you would want to combo it. For example, we can use like many of these right here, and then 2, and then 3, and then finally finish up with the heavy one. So that's a nice combo that it's... The Ash of War in itself, it just deals tremendous damage. And since we do have enough mines, we can enter into this infinite stance that works perfectly for clearing huge amounts of enemies, and it also works perfectly for fighting against elite enemies. On bosses, it does require a little bit more of attacking, punishing the attack animations, the windows of opportunity. You can be using, like, by all means, the heavy one, but yeah, that's how it works. I was telling you that we don't actually need to upgrade our finger seal because we're using a buff that increase the damage of our character, 20% extra damage, 20% extra fire damage if you're using fire armaments, and then that is going to translate into 40% more damage, and this is percentage based, meaning you don't need to have enough faith, and you don't necessarily need to be having to use a upgraded talisman, a upgraded seal to cast this spell. There's a little bit of a concession that you can make right here. I'm using the Fate Not Crystal Tia to be able to use that one spell, although as you were able to see, we're very generous on the stats that this build has, so you don't really struggle that much with anything. You can by all means tone down some points into Mind, for example, and place them into Fate if you don't want to be using the Fate Not Crystal Tia for you to be able to cast that spell. But at the end of the day, this is like the Crystal Tia that we're going to have right here. It's just an extra little side something that is not going to contribute that much to our damage. So anything really that you want to be using as a backup, like always I like to be using the green spell Crystal Tia for the extra stamina, but that's just me. You can very well use whichever one that you would want to use. And that is my rendition of the Knights, of the Light Greatswords Knights. I think that it plays amazingly. The move style and the moveset of the weapon, it's very reminiscent to that of Alucard from the Castlevania series. As soon as I saw that kind of duelist playstyle, that duelist combat stance that Alucard, for example, has, I just fell in love with this weapon, and I wanted to make something that would be sufficient enough to carry you throughout most of the situations in the entirety of the game. And it is very, very powerful. It is very, very much a powerful tool that you can use to bypass any kind of scenario or situation that you might have in front of you. It is a very well-rounded weapon, and it's also quite versatile when it comes to build. Like, for example, if you want to make a mage, you can make this a cold weapon and then give it a different, like, Ash of War. It's just a regular Ash of War. You can use any Ash of War that you would want to use with this weapon. There's many broken Ash of Wars, so yeah, by all means you can use some of those meta Ashes of War. I wanted to use this one specifically for this build. I don't think that this Ash of War is meta, but I do think that it is very powerful. I do think that it's a very, very strong addition to your arsenal. I don't think that it's one of the meta Ashes of War, but this is a very well-rounded weapon that has some decent damage, and that it has an amazing moveset that you can also equip with a meta Ash of War if you feel that you're struggling against something. Anyways, if you like the content, like and very super appreciate it. And also, today you're gorgeous and beautiful person, you're in the gorgeous and beautiful, beautiful person. I'll be seeing you beautiful people in the next one. Have a lovely day and goodbye. Subscribe to the channel, join the Discord, like the video, have a beautiful day and goodbye.